Long regarded as the worst out of the original four, Silent Hill 4 The Room has a lot going on with it. But what is the problem with Silent Hill 4? Well, to start off, we'll just have to educate ourselves a little bit. What even happens in the game? We follow Henry Townsend, who's living in South Ashfield, a city that's half a day's drive away from Silent Hill. He's content with his life, living in the South Ashfield Heights apartments. However, one day, Henry finds himself mysteriously locked in his own apartment, room 302, which is a reference to the original game's name. Along with experiencing strange and nightmarish dreams, he cannot escape through either the windows or his front door, which has been chained shut from the inside. No one, not even people standing directly outside of it, can hear him when he pounds on the door and cries for help. The other residents notice Henry's absence, but carry on with their everyday lives. Even with the right key, the super, Frank Sunderland, cannot open the room. Eileen Galvin, Henry's next-door neighbor in room 303, is concerned about his welfare, though he can only observe her through room 302's peephole and walls. By listening to Eileen, Henry learns that she is passing time in her apartment just before arriving at a friend's party. After 5 days of entrapment, Henry finds a hole that is opened up in his bathroom wall. Armed with only a steel pipe that broke loose when the wall opened, he proceeds to venture into the hellish madness of various other worlds. The hole leads Henry to a variety of strange areas, inhabited by dangerous and sometimes immortal creatures. He's able to travel between these worlds in his apartment through mysterious holes resembling the halo of the sun. Every time he travels back to his apartment, Henry finds himself waking up on his own bed. In these worlds, Henry witnesses the murders of people who are stuck in corresponding realms like him. The murders also occur in the real world. The victims are Cynthia Velasquez, Jasper Geen, Andrew DeSalvo, and Richard Braintree. As Henry investigates further, he learns more about Walter Sullivan, a serial killer that terrorized Ashfield several years ago and left numbers carved into his victims. Walter was eventually arrested and killed himself soon after. However, these new victims bear similar numbers carved into their bodies, matching Walter's modus operandi, and subsequent events suggest that Walter has come back as a ghost. Walter was born in room 302, and his parents abandoned him immediately after he was born and were never seen again. Frank Sunderland handed the newborn to the medics, and Walter found his way to the Wiss House orphanage in the woods outside of Silent Hill, where he was taught occult rituals and teachings of the order. Walter began to believe that room 302 itself was his mother. As an adult, Walter decided to awaken his mother by purifying her through the 21 Sacraments ritual, which required 21 murders. Walter killed 10 people in different ways, and he ended each murder by taking their hearts out. Afterwards, Walter performed the ritual of the Holy Assumption, which allowed him to make himself the 11th victim through suicide and still remain in his own manifested world. The 4 victims that Henry encounters in his wanderings are victims 16 through 19. In Walter's other worlds, Henry also meets 2 versions of Walter, an immortal adult and a child manifestation conjured by Walter's reminiscences. After exploring Walter's first 4 other worlds, Henry arrives in the 5th, an alternate South Ashfield Heights. He sees Walter knocking on Eileen's door, and after finding the key that unlocks Eileen's room, Henry witnesses her bleeding to death on her living room floor, having been assaulted by Walter and named the next victim. Eileen thanks Walter's younger self for trying to protect her from his adult self, and then passes out. Following Eileen's supposed death, Henry wakes up in room 302 and notices an ambulance on its way to St. Jerome's Hospital. In his apartment, Henry notices hauntings invading from the other world. Henry creates a new hole in his laundry room that leads to St. Jerome's Hospital's other world, where he discovers Eileen, alive, in one of its rooms. Henry and Eileen decide to stay together and find a way out of Walter's world. Henry takes Eileen to a halo of the sun. However, he realizes that he is the only one who can use them as she is unable to see them. Eileen tells Henry about Joseph Schreiber, room 302's previous resident, and a journalist who disappeared 6 months before Henry moved in. Henry and Eileen then decide to go down to the deepest part of him and look for the ultimate truth. After leaving the hospital, Henry and Eileen find themselves on the top of a spiral staircase full of strange objects such as human limbs and shadowy figures. Each other world is connected by the staircase, and Henry and Eileen must ascend it in order to find the ultimate truth. The other worlds are the same as before, except that a few paths that had been blocked before are now accessible, and each victim is now a ghost that can be deadly to Henry's health. In the first Otherworld revisited, Henry meets the victim Cynthia Velasquez, who has long, flowing black hair that covers her face. In the second Otherworld, Henry discovers the ghostly Jasper Geen, who is constantly ablaze. It is while exploring this world that Henry realizes that Walter is now pursuing he and Eileen. In the third Otherworld, Henry finds the haunted Andrew DeSalvo, who is shirtless and must be pinned down with the Sword of Obedience in order to continue. While revisiting the fourth Otherworld, Henry locates the victim Richard, who has the ability to teleport. Also in this world, Walter Sullivan kidnaps his younger, manifested self. After defeating the One Truth, Henry and Eileen reach the bottom of the spiral staircase and find a dark abyss with room 302 of the past, a memory of Joseph's. Henry and Eileen meet Joseph in room 302 of the past, who appears as a statue in the ceiling. He tells them about Walter's history and reveals that these other worlds are a creation of Walter's holy assumption ritual. Before his voice fades away, Joseph tells them that they are the last victims, Eileen the mother reborn and Henry the receiver of wisdom. They must kill Walter in order to prevent the 21 Sacraments, or else he will kill them. In room 302, Henry is shocked and speechless when he discovers a sealed room in his apartment that contains Walter's crucified corpse. After using the keys found in his coat pocket, Henry unlocks his chained front door and is bewildered that South Ashfield Heights has also been transformed into a sickening realm. Eileen then appears in the corridor, and they reunite. In the apartment Otherworld, Henry examines 6 hanged corpses. Each one eliminates a chain that is forbidding entry to the superintendent's room, and has the memory of Walter's father's voice. Inside Frank's room, Henry discovers Walter's umbilical cord that Frank had kept in a box for decades. Henry suddenly sees flashes of Walter's memories in his mind, and he falls to the floor with a massive headache. Eileen tries to comfort him, but she leaves to find Walter's child self on her own, and they separate. Henry returns to room 302 and discovers that Walter's corpse has disappeared. Underneath where Walter's corpse was, lies a round black abyss. Henry enters the abyss and comes across a large room with a spiked spinning mechanism in the center, with a pool of blood surrounding it. There are also 8 spears and a giant monster resembling a torso in the room. Walter confronts Henry, who realizes that Eileen is possessed and is about to walk into the large mechanism, unconsciously killing herself. The final fight of the game takes place. Henry uses Walter's umbilical cord on the monster, allowing him to spear it. Walter then loses his immortality and Henry defeats him. Silent Hill 4 has a total of 4 possible endings. Unlike the 3 previous installments, there is no UFO ending. It is also unknown which ending is canon. There are 2 factors that determine the ending. If Henry saves Eileen in time during the final battle, or if Eileen was injured too much during the game, it may be impossible to save her. However, Henry can place holy candles to slow her down. And if Henry cleared 80% of the room 302 hauntings throughout the game, the endings are: escape. After Walter falls to the floor, he raises his arm, calling out Mom before he goes motionless. The room starts to shake, and Eileen, still alive and no longer possessed, slumps to the ground. Henry calls her name and reaches out to her. Young Walter knocks on room 302's door in Walter's apartment world, calling to his mother to let him in. He then falls to his knees into the floor, fading away. After he disappears, the door leading to Henry's apartment opens. Next, Henry is walking away from South Ashfield Heights, and he looks back and then continues on, saying Eileen's name. One day later, he visits her in a normal hospital. Henry smiles and gives Eileen a bouquet of flowers, alluding that their relationship has strengthened over their previous recognition of one another. Eileen says to him, "Guess I'll have to find a new place to live, huh?" This ending is considered the best. To obtain it, the player must save Eileen and clear at least 80% of Henry's apartment of hauntings. Mother. This scene is the same as Escape, except when Henry visits Eileen, she tells him, "Well, I guess I can go back to South Ashfield Heights now." Henry's apartment is then shown as it was at the beginning of the game, covered in blood and rust, implying that spirits still haunt room 302, and that Eileen may still be possessed. To obtain it, the player must save Eileen, but not clear at least 80%. Eileen's death. After Walter falls to the floor, he raises his arm, calling out Mom. Young Walter knocks on room 302's door. He falls to his knees and to the floor. After he disappears, the door leading to Henry's apartment opens. Henry sits up in his bed once more, and then hears on the radio to his despair that Eileen has died of her wounds. After Henry finds out about Eileen's death, he falls to his knees and says her name. To obtain it, The player must let Eileen die, but they do have to clear at least 80% of Henry's apartment. In the final ending, 21 Sacraments. After Walter falls to the floor, he raises his arm, calling out Mom before he goes motionless. Henry stares down at him and then suddenly falls to his knees, holding his head in pain. He then stands up as if possessed by Walter. Young Walter then appears in room 302 as it was at the beginning of the game, with blood and rust. He cuddles up to the couch saying, "I'm home. I won't let anyone get in the way. I'm going to stay with you forever." The radio turns on with a news bulletin announcing the deaths of Eileen, Henry, and others, as the adult Walter lies motionless against a wall. To obtain it, the player must let Eileen die, and not clear at least 80% of Henry's apartment. Silent Hill 4 features an altered gameplay style with third-person navigation and plot elements taken from previous installments. Upon its release, the game received generally favorable reviews from critics, but its departure from the traditional formula of the previous games proved to be divisive. However, the game did receive praise for implementing some unique gameplay mechanics like the hauntings. The objective of Silent Hill 4 is to guide Henry as he seeks to escape from his apartment. Gameplay centers on the apartment, which is shown through a first-person perspective and contains the only save point. The other areas of the game are reached through holes formed in the apartment. For the first half of the game, the room restores Henry's health. In the second half, the room becomes possessed by hauntings that drain his health. In the main levels of the game, the player uses the usual third-person view of the Silent Hill series. The player has a limited item inventory, which can be managed by leaving unneeded items in a chest in Henry's room. Silent Hill 4 emphasizes combat during gameplay, with the near absence of complex puzzles in favor of simple item-seeking tasks. Unlike previous games in the series, separate difficulty settings for combat and puzzles are not available. Changing the combat difficulty also affects the difficulty of puzzles. In the second half of the game, Henry is accompanied and helped in combat by his neighbor Eileen. Eileen cannot die while she is with Henry, although as she takes damage she succumbs to possession, which also occurs if she is given a firearm. The damage Eileen takes in the game determines whether or not she dies during the final boss fight, directly affecting the ending achieved. Combat in Silent Hill 4 follows the pattern set by the other games with a few key differences. The player has access to a variety of melee weapons, but only 2 firearms. Certain melee weapons are breakable. Items which can be equipped, such as talismans, which protect the player from damage from the hauntings, will eventually break after a short period. Another key difference in the combat system is that melee attacks may be charged before they are used, inflicting a greater amount of damage to an opponent than a quick attack. One of the most significant changes is the introduction of immortal ghosts of antagonist Walter's victims. The ghosts, which have the ability to hurt Henry, can be nullified by 2 items. These items can also exercise the hauntings in Henry's apartment. Ghosts can also be knocked down for a lengthy period of time, with 1 of 2 special bullets or pinned permanently with a special sword. Development of the 4th Silent Hill game began shortly after the release of Silent Hill 2, and alongside Silent Hill 3, with the intentions of creating a new style of game that would take the series in a different direction. Despite what has been popularized around the internet, Silent Hill 4 was always meant to be connected to Silent Hill and not an unrelated separate horror game that later became a Silent Hill title, although different gameplay mechanics and change were intended. News of the game development were made public by October 2003, and official announcements by Konami followed at Gamers Day 2004. The game was produced by the series' recurring sound designer and composer Akira Yamaoka. Its working title prior to its incorporation into the rest of the series was simply Room 302. The main concept behind the new game structure was to take the idea of the room as the safest part of your world and make it a danger zone. The first-person perspective was included in this area of the game to give the room's navigation a personal and claustrophobic feel. The producers nonetheless retained the classic third-person perspective and all other areas to accommodate the increased emphasis on action and combat. The developers reused locations already explored in the first half of the game to show the changes undergone by each character introduced in the locations. It was noted that the game, like previous titles, refers to Jacob's Ladder, and that the protagonist Henry Townsend shares a likeness to actor Peter Krause. The architecture of the apartment and the addition of the hole is comparable to a similar non-Euclidean space in author Mark Z. Danielewski's novel House of Leaves. Other novels include the novel Rosemary's Baby, American television series Twin Peaks, and Stephen King. The creators of the game have acknowledged Ryu Murakami's book Coin Locker Babies and the film The Cell as inspirations for the game's premise. To talk more on the Silent Hill 4 unintentional theory, an interviewer asked, "Is it true that the room was not originally going to be part of the Silent Hill series, and that this was only changed partway through development?" In response, "In a sense, this is true because the game began life as simply Room 302. However, it was always at least a spin-off of Silent Hill, and the most important thing was simply that it be different to the previous games. Certainly, if Silent Hill had not existed, we would not have gotten the idea for the room, so in that sense, they have always been together." From an interview with Masashi Tsubayama and Akira Yamaoka, "It is false that this original conception was a completely separate horror game. For example, the idea that 50% or more into development, Room 302 is transformed into Silent Hill 4, and that developers merely sprinkled and inserted some references near the final months of the development, is incorrect. It's likely that even before 5 to 10% of the game's development, it was decided and finalized that Room 302 would be a proper game. Some of the different gameplay mechanics and change, such as the room as a hub world, were intentional because the developers wanted change and new as the focus. There is no proof that a single idea in the final version of Silent Hill 4, such as invisible ghosts, no flashlight, or not visiting the town for much of the game, was the result of Room 302 being a spin-off, or Silent Hill 4 never being meant to be a Silent Hill. Similarly, around the first half of Silent Hill 3 isn't set in the town itself. We wanted to make a sequel after Silent Hill 3, and you could say that was the initial concept, but upon that, we needed to implement a lot of new flavor to the sequel, otherwise it would have been the same old game. So for that, we created the room as the concept for the game. Even though the Silent Hill 4 project was a proper sequel to the series, our top objective for the game was change. Confusion is likely due to an interview which said Silent Hill 4 was not originally supposed to be a Silent Hill. This is likely referring to the very early stages of Room 302, when the developers were uncertain if they wanted Room 302 to be official or not. This is likely not referring to when the actual development of the Silent Hill 4 actually began. What about reception? It was generally well received. The PS2 and Xbox versions have a Metacritic rating of 76, while the PC version was less well received, getting a rating of 67. The story, music, detailed environments, and graphics were generally well praised. Despite some criticism of the combat mechanics, the majority of reviewers found them to be a considerable improvement over those of the previous games. The atmosphere and fear factor was also praised, with many critics finding the game tense and damn scary. Some common criticisms were having to constantly revisit Room 302, the ability to only hold 10 items, and the lack of detailed puzzles and boss fights, although the game technically has boss fights. There was also the absence of the traditional radio and flashlight, and of a UFO ending, though an unused texture for a channeling zone in the game's files hinted developers' original intent to add such an ending. Other common criticisms included, like previous games, poor combat control, clunky movement and combat controls, a lack of originality, with many finding it too similar to the previous games, and the lazier use of previous areas, which some reviewers criticized as forcing tedious backtracking. What about some trivia? Silent Hill 4 uses two minor unseen characters from previous installments as major characters in its plot. The antagonist, Walter, was first referenced in a newspaper in Silent Hill 2 as having killed himself shortly after murdering twins Billy and Miriam Locane. The siblings also appear in the form of the twin victim creature Henry encounters. The second reused character is investigative journalist and previous tenant of Room 302, Joseph, who was first referenced in Silent Hill 3 with a magazine article he had written condemning the Hope House orphanage run by the Order, which Heather can discover at Brookhaven. Memos about Mary's nurse, Rachel, can be found in Silent Hill 4. There's even a painting of her in Room 202, giving a face to the character. Frank Sunderland is the father of James. James is said to have disappeared in Silent Hill together with his wife several years ago. Eileen owns a Robbie the Rabbit doll, which can be seen sitting on her bed. The halo of the sun first appearing in Silent Hill 3 is seen during the loading screen and are the holes which Henry uses to travel between his apartment and Walter's worlds. In Silent Hill Downpour, Murphy can climb a fire escape ladder in Pearl Creek and enter through a window into a replica of Room 302. The window Murphy uses to enter leads to the living room next to the television and bookshelf. The coffee table is gone, as are some of the paintings from around the apartment, but there are chains on the door and a black spot on the wall adjacent to Eileen's room. Murphy can explore the living room, kitchen, and hallway, but cannot enter any other rooms. There is a handgun on the kitchen counter and a first aid kit on the chair beside the window. To go back to reviews, IGN complained about the blurriest textures we've seen in years, and some serious graphical glitches and extremely low mouse sensitivity inhibiting gameplay. GameSpot's review praised the graphics as having been optimized well for PC, but acknowledging keyboard and mouse controls just don't fare that well in an environment of constantly shifting perspective views that can make navigation frustrating. Silent Hill 4 was a nominee for GameSpot's 2004 Best Adventure Award, which ultimately went to Myst 4. The plot of the game was generally well received by reviewers who praised it as horrifying, compelling, and dark. OneUp.com praised the titular room as constantly maintaining a sense of unease for the player. Game Revolution enjoyed the relatively normal appearance of the environment outside Henry's room at the game beginning, writing, "Are these strange other worlds real, or are they just the nightmares of some lunatic shut-in who chained up his own door? It effectively blurs the line between reality and delusion, leading to a singularly creepy game." In contrast, IGN's Douglas C. Perry felt that the familiarity of the story as compared with the other Silent Hill storylines detracted from its horror appeal, although he cared about its characters more than in previous games. Critics were for the most part pleased with the voice acting, although it did receive criticism for the characters' calmness. Nevertheless, Akira Yamaoka said that the characters were to him a little weak. The graphics of the game were praised as detailed. According to Bethany of GameSpot, the game looks its best in corroded, bloody, gritty environments, like the damp steel halls of the water prison or the subterranean subway layers that at one point in the game are walled in living, moving flesh. The character and monster designs received praise as well done. Reviewers generally commended the audio as contributing to the horror of the game, although OneUp wrote that it was subpar for the series.